It's funny, isn't it? We use money every single day, but how often do we actually stop and think about where it all came from? Its history.
Right. It's a fascinating story, really.
Definitely. And that's why, you requested a deep dive into the history of money, and that's exactly what we're going to do today.
Absolutely.
So, get this, we're going to be going from bartering for like the bare necessities to, the world of digital currencies.
It's quite a journey.
Yeah, it really is. We're going to uncover some pretty interesting facts along the way. Um, for example, did you know that ancient China was using spade-shaped coins, like centuries before Europe even thought about minting its first official currency?
It's true. The history of money is full of surprises.
And one of the things that always amazes me is how, the very idea of money, it came about because bartering just wasn't cutting it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You can imagine trying to barter for everything you needed. Oh, can you imagine?
I can't even
It would have been
imagine.
a logistical nightmare. You needed to find someone who not only had what you wanted,
Yeah.
but also wanted what you had to offer. That's
Yeah,
called the double coincidence of wants, and that just severely limited trade.
I see.
And even when early forms of currency started appearing, things like animal skins or salt,
Right.
they were still a challenge to work with, right?
Yeah.
Because their value was subjective. It could change wildly from one region to another.
It wasn't standardized in any way.
Exactly.
I mean, that makes you really appreciate just how much coinage brought to the world in terms of standardization, I mean.
Absolutely. Coinage was a game changer.
Yeah.
When they discovered that coin minting site in China, dating back to 640 BCE,
Wow.
it really revolutionized trade. I mean, these spade coins, as they called them, they represented like a huge step forward
Okay.
because they had a consistent weight, shape, and markings.
Right.
So it made trading so much easier.
So it sounds like China was really ahead of the curve when it came to this whole coinage
Oh,
thing.
for sure.
But I'm curious, around the same time, were there like other civilizations also, experimenting with their own forms of currency?
Yeah, definitely. Around 600 BCE, King Alyattes of Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey,
Okay.
introduced the Lydian stater. And this is often considered the first official currency, as we think of it.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is they were made from electrum.
Electrum.
Yeah, which is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver.
Oh, wow. So they didn't have to actually separate those metals.
Exactly. They were pretty clever, weren't they?
That's really smart.
And so that, in addition to like the standardization of their coins,
Yeah.
helped Lydia become super prosperous. In fact, have you ever heard the saying, as rich as Croesus?
Yeah.
That's referring to the last Lydian king, Croesus, whose wealth was just legendary.
That's amazing. It's incredible how these early forms of currency, they really laid the foundation for the entire financial system we have today.
Right. It's like the building blocks.
Yeah, exactly. But when did paper money come onto the scene and where?
You're going to love this.
Okay.
It was China again. During the Yuan dynasty in 1260 CE, they switched to paper money, way before Europe even considered it.
That's incredible.
Centuries before.
Wow.
And, Marco Polo, he documented this in his travels and was just blown away by this new kind of currency.
Mm.
And apparently, Chinese banknotes even came with this warning against counterfeiting.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it was something like, those who counterfeit will be beheaded.
Whoa. No messing around.
No kidding.
They took their money seriously. It's fascinating that they adopted paper money that early. Why do you think they did that? What factors were at play?
Well, we can't know for sure,
Yeah.
but one possibility is that China's vast trade networks, they were already huge.
Yeah.
Paper money, being way lighter than coins, would have been a lot easier to transport.
Right. And to use in big transactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just made
Yeah.
sense.
It's like the evolution of money is driven by practical needs.
For sure.
So while China was embracing paper money, Europe was still all about those coins.
Pretty much, yeah. At that time, Europe had all this precious metal flowing in from their colonies, so they were focused on minting more coins.
Okay.
But as trade grew, they started to realize that, carrying around huge amounts of coins,
Right. It's not very practical.
it wasn't practical at all.
Yeah.
So they gradually started to move towards paper money, too.
I imagine that wasn't an overnight change.
Oh, no, definitely not. It started with banks. They started issuing banknotes,
Okay.
kind of like IOUs.
IOUs.
Yeah, so you could deposit your coins at the bank and get a banknote in return.
Okay.
And this banknote was a promise from the bank that they'd pay you back in coins, you see.
Ah, I see.
So it was a step towards a more, what's the word, abstract representation of money.
It wasn't government-issued currency yet, right?
No, not yet. It was more like a promise from the bank, backed by their reserves.
Hmm. It's amazing how much trust plays a role in how money works.
Right. Trust is everything.
Yeah. But before we move on, I have to ask about the story I heard about playing cards being used as money. Is that really true?
Oh, it's totally true. And it happened in Canada, back when it was a French colony.
Okay.
They had this huge coin shortage in 1685.
Oh, no. What did they do?
Well, the governor, he came up with this brilliant idea.
Okay.
He took playing cards, wrote denominations on them, signed them.
Mm.
Boom! First European-issued paper money in North America.
Wow. Playing cards as money.
Isn't that something?
That's incredible. It shows you how adaptable the idea of money can be.
Definitely.
But I imagine as trade routes expanded, countries started interacting more, and money probably became a tool for competition.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's how we get to the era of currency wars.
Yeah.
It's this fascinating and often forgotten part of financial history.
Currency wars. So it wasn't just about goods and services. It was about, like, the power of money itself.
Exactly. Countries realized they could manipulate their currencies to get ahead in international trade.
So they try to devalue their rivals' currencies.
Yeah, that's one tactic.
To make their own exports cheaper.
Precisely. And sometimes they even tried to wipe out a rival's currency entirely.
Wow. It sounds almost ruthless.
It was a high-stakes game.
But let's jump ahead to the 21st century. We see this huge shift with mobile payments. Remember when Apple Pay first came out? It felt like the future.
I know, right?
Like your phone becomes your wallet.
It was a big step towards digital transactions and leaving physical money behind.
And then you have Venmo and PayPal making sending money as easy as texting.
Exactly. And, it's interesting. Mobile payments took off in Asia and Europe way before they caught on in North America.
Yeah, that's true.
I wonder why that is.
I don't know. It makes you think about the societal implications of this whole shift.
Definitely. Mobile payments have changed how we behave as consumers, how we think about data privacy, even financial inclusion.
It's a lot to consider. And then on top of that, we have virtual currencies like Bitcoin.
Ah, yes, Bitcoin. It's like this whole other level of challenging how we think about money.
It operates outside of central banks and governments, completely decentralized.
Right, and it exists only electronically, no physical form at all.
And a lot of people are drawn to the lower transaction fees compared to traditional methods.
True, but then there's also the volatility, these wild price swings.
Yeah, that makes some people hesitant.
Understandably so. I mean, the world of cryptocurrencies is still in its early days, full of potential.
But risky, too.
Yeah, for sure.
And this whole thing with the pseudonymous creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, it just adds to the mystery.
It's a whole new frontier. It feels like we're on the verge of another huge shift in how we use and understand money.
Definitely. But before we dive into the whole world of cryptocurrency, I think it's important to understand this key moment in financial history, the gold standard.
Ah, yes, the
Yeah.
gold standard. That's a crucial part of the story.
Because it really shaped global economies for decades. It was this system that linked the value of currency to a fixed amount of gold.
Right, and that was meant to instill confidence and stability.
It was like a promise that your money was worth something real, something tangible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even though the gold standard isn't used anymore, it's still really important to understand, if we want to understand our financial systems today.
It's like looking back to understand the present.
Exactly. The gold standard wanted to create stability by using a physical commodity,
Right.
kind of like how some people see cryptocurrencies today.
That's an interesting parallel. They're both trying to be alternatives to, purely fiat currencies.
Exactly. I think this shows how people always want alternatives to traditional financial systems.
Whether it's tangible assets or, complicated algorithms.
Right. And that really comes down to just wanting trust and stability in a world that's always changing.
Absolutely. So tell me, how did this gold standard actually work?
Well, it was all about this fixed exchange rate between a country's currency and gold. You could go to a bank and trade in your paper money for actual gold.
So it was like having a gold receipt for your money.
You got it. And that made people trust the currency more because it had something real backing it up.
It makes sense, but how did it affect international trade?
Well, because exchange rates were predictable, it actually helped international trade.
Ah, I see.
Imagine always knowing how much your currency was worth compared to others.
That would simplify things a lot.
Right. It made global commerce way
It
easier.
sounds like a pretty good system. Why did we stop using it?
Well, no system's perfect. The gold standard was stable in good times, but when things got rough, it was too rigid.
Okay.
For example, if there was a recession, and a country wanted to boost its economy,
Yeah.
it couldn't just print more money because it was limited by how much gold it had.
So the gold standard was like a constraint?
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
And that became a problem in the 20th century, especially with World War I.
Right. Countries needed to fund the war.
Exactly. Their gold reserves were stretched thin, the system never really recovered, and then the Great Depression hit.
And that really exposed the problems with the gold standard.
Oh, yeah. Governments couldn't respond properly because they couldn't change their monetary policy.
So clinging to the gold standard during a crisis actually made things worse.
Unfortunately, yes.
Mm.
In the end, they had to abandon it and go with fiat currency.
Which is what we use today.
Exactly. Money that's not tied to a commodity,
Yeah.
but gets its value from the trust people put in the government.
So our money is based on a promise, a shared belief in its value.
That's a great way to put it. It's
Right.
really remarkable when you think about it.
It is, but it also makes you wonder about control and, potential for things to go wrong.
You're right. That's a key point. Moving away from the gold standard gave governments more power over their economies.
They could adjust interest rates, control the money supply.
Yep. And use other policies to manage inflation and, try to stimulate growth.
But that power comes with responsibility.
Absolutely.
It's like walking a tightrope
Trying to find the balance between the flexibility of fiat currency.
and making sure it's not abused.
Exactly. And, speaking of trust and potential issues, what about cryptocurrencies? You mentioned that they sparked your interest.
Oh, definitely. What fascinates me the most is their decentralized nature.
Yeah, a big deal.
The idea that a currency can operate without governments or central banks, it's mind-blowing.
I know, right? It's like a whole different way of thinking about money.
It could change everything. Finance could become truly global.
It's a bold vision for sure.
But there are challenges too, right? Like with any new idea.
Of course. The big one is volatility.
The price swings.
Yeah, they make it risky to invest, and, people hesitate to use them every day.
And there are also concerns about the environmental impact.
Oh, for sure. Mining some cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, uses a lot of energy.
It's a valid concern. It seems like the future of crypto depends on overcoming these issues,
I agree.
finding ways to make them more stable, reduce their energy use, and make sure they're secure.
Exactly. Cryptocurrencies are still in their early stages.
Like the internet in the 90s.
That's a good analogy. It's a time of experimentation and innovation, but also a lot of people are skeptical.
It's like a digital gold rush.
Yeah. With people rushing in to see what they can find, but we don't know what's going to happen.
Right, there will be winners and losers. The whole landscape could change drastically.
You got it. So this brings up an interesting question.
Okay.
What's the future of money in a world that's so influenced by technology and globalization?
Yeah, that's a big question. Will digital currencies replace cash? Will we invent new forms of money that we can't even imagine yet?
Or will we go back to something more tangible, like a digital gold standard?
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities.
Throughout history, humans have always found new ways to exchange value.
From bartering to coins to paper money to digital currencies.
It shows how creative and adaptable we are.
But as we move into this new territory, it's important to remember what we've learned from the past about trust, stability, and being careful about the promises and potential dangers of new technologies.
Wise words. The future of money will probably be shaped by a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Technology, regulations, how consumers behave, even geopolitics.
It's a fascinating time.
For sure. And I'm curious to see what happens next.
Me too. But before we get too caught up in the future, let's bring this back to our listeners.
Okay.
How has this journey through the history of money affected you? What questions do you have as you make financial decisions in this rapidly changing world? It really is amazing to think about how, like our own relationship with money is shaped by, all these big historical events.
Right. We don't always think of it.
We kind of take money for granted, but when you look at its history, it shows you how our values have changed, how
Yeah.
technology has advanced, and even, how we think about trust and power.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, what are your thoughts? What really stood out to you in our journey through the history of money?
Well, it's been pretty wild to see how, from those early days with animal skins and salt to all this stuff about digital assets and like decentralized finance, people have always found new ways to, exchange.
Oh, coins and banknotes.
It's about how our values have shifted, how
Yeah.
we see trust, and the systems we create to, make our world work.
And now, with digital currency shaking things up, we really need to think about what we've learned from the past.
I agree.
Like, take the gold standard, for example.
Yeah.
It was too rigid to keep up with the world, but it shows how important stability and trust are for any money system.
That's a good point. You can't just have innovation without a strong foundation.
Or it could lead to chaos.
Exactly.
So as we navigate, this world of digital currencies and decentralized finance,
Right.
we need to balance all the excitement of the new stuff with a bit of caution and, really understanding what makes a financial system stable and fair.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this brings us back to you, the listener. What did you take away from our deep dive today?
Yeah. What did you learn?
How will this knowledge help you with your own financial decisions, in a world where things are changing so fast?
Thinking about it all, I guess what really struck me is just how complex and connected our financial world is.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Money isn't just about buying things.
It's about so much more.
It's tied to what we believe in, what we hope for, and even, what we're afraid of.
Yeah.
And as we move forward, I think it's important to keep talking about these things,
Absolutely.
to ask questions and, to try to shape the future of money so it benefits everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
The history of money, it shows us how creative and adaptable humans are.
Always looking for a better way.
And as we write the next chapter in this story, let's do it with, our eyes wide open.
Being aware of both the good and the bad.
And trying to create a system that's innovative and fair for everyone.
Well said.
Well, that about wraps it up for our deep dive into the history of money.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been fantastic having you here. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And I hope this has given you a new perspective on, the forces that shape the world of finance.